In the bustling heart of Manhattan, Alexander Harrington, the billionaire CEO of Harrington Luxe Restaurants, settled into his usual private table at the flagship location for what he expected to be another routine lunch. But when the crisp white napkin was lifted to reveal a small folded note tucked beneath his water glass, the words scrawled in familiar handwriting stopped his heart cold. "Alex, it's Ethan. I never stopped loving you. Meet me after closing. E." His hand trembled slightly as he slipped the note into his pocket, the elegant script bringing back memories he had spent years suppressing. The restaurant hummed with the usual midday crowd. Lawyers in power suits, tourists snapping photos of the crystal chandeliers, and the soft clink of silverware. But for Alexander, the world had narrowed to that single piece of paper. How had Ethan found him after all these years? And why here, in the very empire Alexander had built to prove he no longer needed the man who once knew him better than anyone? He forced a calm smile as the waiter returned with his usual order of seared scallops, but the food tasted like ash. Across the dining room, the kitchen door swung open briefly, and Alexander caught a glimpse of a familiar profile, the same broad shoulders, the same careful way of moving, before the doors closed again. His pulse thundered in his ears. This was real. Ethan Blake was working in his restaurant. 25 years earlier, in the fall of 1998, Alexander had been a driven sophomore at NYU, already mapping out his future empire while his Texas family demanded perfection. Ethan was the quiet culinary student who worked part-time at the campus cafe. Their first meeting happened when Alexander spilled coffee across Ethan's notebook during a crowded morning rush. Instead of anger, Ethan had laughed, offered to buy him a new one, and somehow that small kindness cracked open a door Alexander had kept bolted shut his entire life. Late-night walks along the Hudson, stolen kisses in Ethan's tiny walk-up, conversations that lasted until dawn about dreams and fears. Ethan wanted his own restaurant one day, creating dishes that told stories. Alexander dreamed of building something unbreakable. For 2 years they loved in secret, and for the first time Alexander felt truly seen, not as the heir to a conservative legacy, but as himself. Then the call from his father changed everything. "It's time to grow up, son. Stop playing around and find a good woman. The family name depends on it." The pressure mounted with every holiday visit home, the not-so-subtle hints about marriage and heirs. Terrified of losing his future, his family's support, and the life he had been raised to want, Alexander ended it in a tearful confrontation on a rainy Brooklyn street. He called it a phase, said he could never be that person. The pain in Ethan's eyes still haunted his dreams. Now, at 42, Alexander had everything money could buy: restaurants in 12 cities, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a son Tyler who was 22 and distant. He had married Caroline, a woman from a good family. The marriage ended amicably 5 years ago when she admitted she knew he was never fully present. He had built walls so high that even he sometimes forgot what lay beneath them. He paid the check without eating and stepped into the New York afternoon, the note burning in his pocket like a live coal. Back in his office, he canceled 2 meetings and stared at the city skyline. Part of him wanted to fire Ethan discreetly and move on. Another part, the part he had silenced for decades, ached to know why Ethan had come back. By evening, the pull was too strong. Alexander changed into a simple sweater and jeans and returned through the back entrance, just as the last customers were leaving. The kitchen lights were still on. He pushed through the swinging doors, and there stood Ethan, wiping down a stainless steel counter, looking older, but somehow exactly the same. Warm brown eyes, the faint scar on his left eyebrow from a kitchen accident long ago. "Alex," Ethan said quietly, setting the cloth down. His voice was steady, but his hand shook. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Alexander's throat tightened. "Where did you get this job?" "I applied under my mother's maiden name. I needed to see you. Needed you to know I never stopped loving you, even after the way you left." Ethan's eyes searched his face. "I'm not here to ruin your life. I needed to know if the man I loved still exists somewhere inside the billionaire who pretends he doesn't." The words landed like stones in still water. Alexander felt the carefully constructed walls crack. Outside, the city lights glittered against the dark river. Inside, for the first time in 25 years, he felt truly afraid. Not of losing his empire, but of losing the last chance to be honest with himself. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and warm bread, the same comforting scents that once filled Ethan's tiny apartment. Alexander leaned against the counter, arms crossed, trying to keep his voice level. "You think showing up here after 25 years is fair? I have a company to run, a son who barely speaks to me, board members who would sell me out in a heartbeat if they knew." Ethan smiled sadly. "I know exactly who you became, Alex. I've read every interview, watched every stock report. But I also remember the boy who used to cry after talking to his father on the phone. That boy is still in there. I can see him right now." He stepped closer, close enough that Alexander could smell the faint trace of citrus from the hand soap they used in the kitchen. "I didn't come to demand anything. I came because I finally got my own restaurant dream, a small place in Brooklyn, and I realized I couldn't open it without closing the chapter we never finished." Memories flooded back uninvited. The night they danced in Ethan's kitchen to an old radio, Flour dusting their clothes. The way Ethan's laugh could make the worst day bearable. Alexander had thrown all of that away for a future that now felt hollow. "I was scared," he admitted, the words scraping out. "My father threatened to cut me off completely. I was 20 and stupid, and I thought I could bury it." "You weren't stupid," Ethan said softly. "You were surviving. But survival isn't the same as living." He reached out and touched Alexander's sleeve, the contact brief but electric. "I'm not asking you to come out tomorrow. I'm asking you to talk to me. Just talk, like we used to." They talked until the night manager knocked and told them to lock up. Alexander learned Ethan had moved to California for a while, worked his way up in several kitchens, even got engaged once to a woman before realizing he was only repeating Alexander's mistake. The engagement ended gently, and Ethan came back east hoping for a fresh start. He had seen the job posting at Harrington Lux and took it as a sign. "I wasn't stalking you," he added with a small laugh. "I just needed closure, or maybe a second chance. I'll let you decide which." Alexander left the restaurant that night with his head spinning. Back in his penthouse, he poured a scotch and stared at old photos he had kept hidden in a locked drawer. The two of them on a ferry to Staten Island, young and unafraid. For the first time in decades, he let himself feel the ache of what he had lost. Sleep came late and restless. The next morning, he called Ethan's number, the one written on the back of the note. "Lunch tomorrow," he said. "Not at the restaurant. Somewhere private." Ethan agreed without hesitation. Alexander spent the day in meetings, nodding at projections and quarterly reports, but his mind was already on that lunch. He told himself it was just closure. Deep down, he knew it was the beginning of something he could no longer control. They met at a quiet cafe in Chelsea, far from prying eyes. Alexander arrived first, choosing a corner table with his back to the wall out of habit. When Ethan walked in wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans, the years seemed to melt away. They ordered coffee and talked for 3 hours. Alexander spoke about Tyler, about how his son sensed the emotional distance and pulled away. Ethan listened without judgment, sharing stories of his own mother's quiet acceptance when he finally told her the truth at 30. "She said she always knew," Ethan said with a gentle smile. "Parents often do." The conversation turned heavier when Alexander mentioned his mother's recent health scare and how his sister had started hinting that he should remarry for the sake of the family image. "They don't know," he said quietly. "No one does. Not really." Ethan reached across the table and squeezed his hand once, a gesture so natural it stole Alexander's breath. "You don't have to tell them today, but you can't keep carrying this alone." That afternoon, Alexander returned to the office and found his business partner, Richard, waiting with spreadsheets. Richard had been with him since the beginning, knew every secret except the biggest one. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Richard joked. Alexander forced a laugh and changed the subject, but the lies sat heavy in his stomach. That night, he met Ethan again, this time for a walk in Central Park after dark. They kept a careful distance, but their shoulders brushed occasionally, and each touch felt like coming home. The following week was a blur of stolen moments, coffee runs, late-night texts, one quiet dinner in Ethan's small Brooklyn apartment where he cooked the same pasta dish he used to make in college. Alexander felt himself waking up piece by piece. Yet every time he left Ethan's place, he felt the weight of his empire pressing down. Board meetings loomed. A major investor dinner was scheduled in 2 weeks, and Tyler had texted asking when they could finally have a real conversation. The collision course was set, and Alexander knew he could no longer swerve. The first crack appeared at Sunday brunch with his sister Claire. She had flown in from Dallas and wasted no time. Mom keeps asking when you'll bring someone home again. Someone appropriate. The word landed like a slap. Alexander stared at his eggs Benedict and felt the old shame rise. Later, alone in his car, he called Ethan. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. Ethan's voice was steady on the line. "You don't have to do it alone, but you do have to decide what kind of life you want to live." Misunderstanding bloomed the next day when Richard cornered him after a strategy meeting. "I saw you leaving the restaurant with that waiter last week. Anything I should know?" Alexander froze. The accusation hung between them. Not yet spoken, but clear. Richard's tone carried the old boys club edge that had always protected Alexander's secret. "Just be careful, Alex. We can't afford scandals right now." The warning felt like betrayal from the one person he had trusted most in business. That evening, Ethan sensed the shift during their walk. "You're pulling away again," he said quietly. Alexander tried to explain the pressure, the investor dinner, the family expectations. Ethan listened, then stopped under a street lamp. "I waited 25 years, Alex. I can wait longer. But I won't watch you disappear into the same fear that took you from me before." The words stung because they were true. Alexander went home that night and stared at his reflection, seeing both the powerful CEO and the frightened 20-year-old who had run away. The crisis escalated when Tyler showed up unannounced to the penthouse. "Dad, I know something's going on. You've been different. Just tell me the truth." Alexander almost spoke then, but the words stuck. Instead, he hugged his son and promised they would talk soon. The promise felt like another lie, and the guilt kept him awake until dawn. The investor dinner arrived like a storm. Alexander stood at the head of the long table in his flagship restaurant, toasting another record quarter, when his phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "I'm here if you need me." The simple words gave him courage he didn't know he possessed. Halfway through dessert, Richard pulled him aside. "I did some digging. Ethan Blake, your old college friend. People talk, Alex. If this gets out, the Texas investors will walk." The threat was clear. Alexander felt the walls closing in. He left the dinner early and drove straight to Ethan's apartment. When Ethan opened the door, Alexander stepped inside, and for the first time in decades, let the tears come. "I'm tired of hiding," he whispered. Ethan held him without question, and in that quiet kitchen, they made a plan. Not perfect, but honest. Alexander would tell Tyler first, then his sister. The company would have to adapt, or he would walk away. The decision felt both terrifying and freeing. The next morning, he met Tyler for breakfast. The words came haltingly at first, then poured out. "I'm gay, son. I always have been." Tyler stared for a long moment, then reached across the table. "I kind of figured, Dad. I just wanted you to trust me enough to say it." The relief was so profound, Alexander laughed through tears. But the hardest conversation was still ahead. Richard called an emergency board meeting. "We need to talk about image," he said coldly. Alexander stood tall. "The image is changing. I'm not hiding anymore." The room erupted. 2 major investors threatened to pull funding. Alexander felt the empire he had built begin to crack. Yet for the first time, the cracks let in light. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Alexander's life. Headlines speculated. Some board members resigned. His mother called from Texas, voice tight with disappointment that slowly softened into reluctant acceptance after long talks. Claire flew in again, this time to stand beside him. "I love you, big brother. Always have." The support from unexpected places, old employees, Tyler's friends, even a few investors who respected honesty, kept him standing. Through it all, Ethan was there, steady and patient. They walked Central Park in daylight now, no longer hiding. One crisp autumn afternoon, as leaves swirled around them, Alexander stopped and took Ethan's hand in full view of the city. "I love you," he said simply. "I should have said it every day for the last 25 years." Ethan's smile was the same one that had started it all. You're saying it now. That's what matters. The restaurant chain survived, smaller, but more authentic. Alexander stepped back from day-to-day operations and began mentoring young chefs, including several from the LGBTQ community. Ethan opened his Brooklyn restaurant to rave reviews, and the two men spent quiet evenings cooking together, laughing about old stories and planning new ones. Tyler joined them often, bringing friends and a new ease to their relationship. One evening, standing on the rooftop of Ethan's building with the Manhattan skyline glittering below, Alexander realized he had not lost his empire. He had traded its weight for something infinitely more valuable. He turned to Ethan. Thank you for the note. Ethan laughed softly. Thank you for reading it. True or false? Hiding who you are can ever lead to true success and happiness?